Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. This is quite an intimate group, but as I said, this will be shared widely as well following the kind of recording. We don't have a chair today. Essentially, the three of us, Rashi, myself, and Anoop, are chairing the session, but it's just to bringing the strands of the project together. We've had quite a number of conversations throughout the summer about the methodologies and approaches of working in gender-based violence in India, and this is a kind of a culmination of it is our work on the topic in India. So I will share my presentation.
Oh.
You should be able to see that. Yeah. Great. So what we'll do is I will open with kind of a general overview of what the project was, what the aims were, and what have we done kind of accomplished and network-wise in the period of the project. I will hand over to Rashi to discuss particular focus on the community voices that were integral in developing the network, as well as the research agenda for the future. And then Anoop will close at the end with her kind of summary of where we're going from now in this endeavor, really. So the aims of the network when we started was to engage with vulnerable migrant slum-dwelling communities, to identify their cultural, social, economic, and relational areas for critical change and mitigating gender-based violence. So we wanted to look at gender-based violence and the kind of its complexity, not linking to domestic violence particularly, but look at more societal and wider factors that will be relevant here. We also wanted to look at how to best engage with lived experiences, experts and disciplinary academics, communities, stakeholders, policymakers, government agencies in addressing GBV. Within the context that we framed GBV within, so the cultural, social, and economic aspects of things. So here, what we wanted to do is make sure that we are drawing on expertise, knowledge, and skills across the domains. So it's not just kind of an academic project. We wanted to make sure that we are linking directly with the communities and directly with the organizations that work with them that oftentimes are not kind of academic organizations. So thinking about how do we all engage together in this approach, but also looking at how to best enable and support vulnerable communities to co-construct fundamental GBV themes using digital storytelling. And this is where we have developed a specific methodological approach linking theatre practice with digital storytelling in order to develop resilience, in order to develop connections and trust with the communities, so they can share their stories that can then guide the future research agenda within this topic in the context of India and surrounding countries. So what we had was basically three key strands. We have championed community voice throughout this project, particularly working within the theatre and storytelling methodology. We wanted to look at interdisciplinary integration of two methodologies to promote trust, as I said, and rapport building with our communities, but also to make sure that in any discussions that we have between kind of stakeholders, academics, NGOs, government strands, that we are anchoring on the lived experiences of the community members and the needs that they're expressing. In order to facilitate communication across stakeholders, we've held a number of workshops over the summer between UK and India, and that was quite fruitful because it showcased the different dimensions of working within the space of gender-based violence and generated quite a bit of knowledge in terms of moving forward the research agenda on the topic. But also through that, we have developed our network and identified key partners to take on the approach and share our research objectives in the future. So that was quite a useful exercise as well for us to kind of show that we have a shared ethos and shared practice in the approach of kind of trying to address gender-based violence in India. So I'm just going to run quickly through some of the workshops that we've done. We had fantastic support from the Visual Minutes and additional funding from De Montfort University to support kind of creation of these visual minutes around the workshops that translate what has been discussed into the visual pieces that you see here. So one of the first opening workshop was around understanding the role of culture in understanding gender-based violence, what the prevalence of gender-based violence in India is, and what might be some of the key issues that we need to address, and particularly localized within the cultural narrative of India. We also looked at the methodology, so applied theatre and digital storytelling, and how that can be used within communities to promote sensitive work, something that connects and creates safe spaces within the community, but also maintains their dignity and gives them voice to advocate for their rights and needs within that space. We then moved on to discussing sensitivity. For us, it was really important to recognize that any research within that space needs to be sensitive to the issues and spaces, because the populations that we're looking at are particularly vulnerable and marginalized within the Indian context. And here we had experts contributing their knowledge and expertise to discuss that and build best practice to again drive our research agenda in the future. We then looked at how the kind of work that you would want to do within GBV, how that can impact and create change within the communities. And we've heard from the NGOs and community organizations that do work in that space and learn from best practice around, for example, implementing dance movement therapy within work of gender-based violence reduction, or promoting recovery for the women, but also different steps of community engagement that might be necessary in order to have meaningful impact locally as well as within the organization. And finally, we've looked at a wider international and policy context, looking at if we wanted to create change that is on a higher level, that involves policymakers, that involves maybe systems around healthcare, education, what might be some of the things that need to be considered in order to promote kind of eradicating gender-based violence that might be inherent within those systems, or might, this is where the systems might step in to support that work. So looking at kind of champions within the systems and education and literacy around GBV that might be necessary for effective response to gender-based violence. And it was great to see that through that work in the project, we have identified a number of partners that we can work with in the future, and that shared our ethos about working with communities and creating change around GBV. And working quite interestingly in a lot of creative approaches. There was quite a lot of synergy with that. And particularly Kolkata Sanved was the dance movement therapy. The Tweet Foundation, which is the Transgender Welfare, Equity and Empowerment Trust. So this is a Mumbai and Delhi-based organization that works with trans men and trans women in an Indian context, that do a lot for the community as well, that are interested in collaborating in the future, as well as We Care organization in Bangladesh, which focuses on empowerment of women and poor communities. So again, we've established new partnerships outside of just Indian context, and to move that agenda forward. And I'm going to stop here and hand over to Rashi to do her bit about the strand on the community voice and how that was part of the organization. So I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Nadia. I'll share my screen. Is this visible to everybody?
Yeah. Okay.
So we do have the context already set by Nadia, so I don't have to go into the details of it. But two of the things that I would like to say here is that one, when we were looking at the gender-based violence as a social reality in the Indian context. We know it's a very sensitive topic. We know it explores vulnerabilities and marginal communities in a very messy and chaotic manner as well. These are complexities that we need to look into and try and understand how these complexities take place or they unfold in the in everyday life of the two communities that we have looked at, the Hijra community and the slum-dwelling internal migrant women. We started with the idea of how gender-based violence includes all forms of structural, political, economic, social, cultural, and symbolic violence. And hence, what is it that we are looking at is not just what are the causes of it, but also the narratives that come about in terms of resilience, strength, and the negotiations that each of the participants that we have met have made in their lives, sometimes very consciously so, and sometimes not so consciously. And hence, those spaces that we created through our workshops brought in ideas, brought in experiences that they had not thought about earlier. Okay. Yeah. So this is the community visits timeline. We had a visit in March 2023, where we're looking at like the core team kind of met a group of Hijra community and a group of women, tried to question, tried to engage with them and make them understand what the project is about and why we were going to be engaging with them in the course of the next few months. We had a building kind of a workshop module. We have that template, and we call it like, the flexible template for workshops that we have had. In June, we went to visit the communities. That was in Pune, Maharashtra. Both these communities are housed within the city of Pune. And that's where we kind of did our work. I'll come to what were the different modalities in which we worked. And September, we had a showcase event where we invited the communities to a venue in Pune. Both the communities were invited on the same day. One in the first half of the day and the second in the second half. But we also had a time which was overlapping so that the two communities can have a little bit of interaction with each other. The reason we did these two separate segments is that largely since we're talking about the cultural context and everything, we were not very sure how would the interaction between the two go if we keep the segments together. So we wanted to test that and see how the experience for them would be like. This is usually how we look at the conventional approach. Of course, it's very extractive. It is seen as intrusive. It's kind of very positivist in nature, trying to understand what the truth is. Even if we are capturing the lived experiences and trying to understand the intersubjectivity of how research is taking place with the researcher and the researched, that doesn't let go of the control that the researcher has over the process. And that's what we did not want to replicate in our work. So our network's approach was very co-creative. It was very participatory. It was collaborative as well. It created spaces which were inclusive, democratic. In one of our workshops, Selena had mentioned we also kind of create the third spaces. So some of you might want to go back and look at that workshop as well as the workshop 02 that you have. And looking at how these third spaces are created. We're looking at non-extractive, non-intrusive, non-threatening kind of, spaces to be created. And in addition to that, how do we build a community? Since Andy's here, so Andy spoke a lot about, how communities are created while these processes take place. So how fun, joy, how organic can it be, how humor can be used, and how game and play kind of come into picture. So we used those ideas as well to move beyond the idea of just shared work, but more in terms of co-construction and co-creativity. So this is what our ethos kind of looks like. We're kind of trying to build sensibilities for vulnerable situations, marginalized communities, and sensitive issues. So I kind of put it as sensibilities for vulnerabilities and sensibilities for vulnerabilities and sensitivities. These are some of the ideas that we kind of brought together. We're looking at understandings across community. We are looking at collective experience. We are looking at human connections, which may or may not need the facilitator, how that process has a life of its own. So we were more interested in that. Conversations, of course, visibility or being seen, being heard, being respected, dignity. All of these were the more core issues that we wanted to highlight, and that's the premise of our entire work. The right to be and the right to become. that can be part of how these communities can be integrated, which need not just be about one community or the other, but how they can come together. And that sort of came up with us during the showcase event, where there was this constant resonation of, your marginality and vulnerability with the other group, which you had not thought about earlier. So by the end of, our engagement with the community for this specific section, I wouldn't say end of conversations, but for this specific section, I think we kind of moved into a space where these two communities were brought together and they had started to look at the other, and it became like, they were seen and heard by the other as well. So that, I would say, was something that we really gained out of the three different communications that we had with them. This is a 3-workshop model that we went with. As I said, it's co-designed with the idea of, having a very flexible template. Nadia had already mentioned that we were trying to bring together applied theater and storytelling. There is an entire video for this on YouTube, so you can go back and look at it. It's on the GenViR project website, YouTube channel, and I'll just go into the basic ideas of it. The rest is, of course, it's a lot more than what I'll just say here. It basically used the idea of flexibility, improvisation, how when we have specific methods, sometimes we make them way too stringent and institutionalized, even when it comes to creative and arts-based methods. So our idea was not to have any kind of very strict and stringent template that can be mimicked in other places. Rather, keep it open, keep it flexible, and keep it in a way where the participants have a say in it, where their cultural context can be brought in. And this did happen as we kind of conducted workshops with them. So we were kind of hoping that when these workshops are conducted with the communities, these communities would be able to take charge. And that's the I think that's one of the things that we managed to do during the course of our work. Our recruitment process, that was fairly easy. We kind of used the help and support of the local NGO partners, the link workers, the facilitators, the NGO workers and staff who really helped us, kind of giving us what the situation might look like. What time we can go in and what time we can engage with them, and how we need to change the way we had come in or the idea that we had. I used the idea word of mouth as well, because what happened over the course of our engagement is that we did have a lot of people coming in and dropping out. This happened specifically with the Hijra community. And the word of mouth helped here is because some people joined us on the second workshop, largely because the others had a good time in the first one. So it sort of was kind of a ripple effect that helped us gain more voices, listen to more people, and have more participation that we had than the one that we had expected early on. So there was a constant move in terms of many participants, less participants, again many participants, and so on. A flexible framework for participation, again, that kind of goes with the second one, that at all points in our workshops, we told the participants that you have a right to not be here if you don't want to. And this was, again, important because a number of them had given up their day job, or they had to take care of their family. Specifically with women, they had to leave their children with somebody in the family, and they were constantly worried about till what time they can be there. A long-term partnership approach was also something that we kind of went in with, saying that we are not here only for this one-time event. This is a network that will continue. This is a partnership that we would want to constantly work with and work upon. So that was the recruitment process. This is the initial thing that we kind of got in. How exactly do we conduct the workshop? So the visit in March gave us these basic ideas around which we wanted to have our conversations and initiate conversations. So with the Hijra community, the role of community became very significant. It came out as one of the most specific support systems that they have. Their desire to have education and healthcare. This was in the first one, but in later on, we also had education, healthcare, acceptance, employment, and so on and so forth. Creative arts as expression of identity and means of survival was something that was very significant for a couple of our participants. One of them is a Rangoli maker. And he does that for everyday, like that's part of his employment. There are also people who are makeup artists. There are people who sell fruits. So we have vendors, we have creative arts, we have different things that are being done by the different people that we engaged with. For slum dwelling internal migrant women, I think the first thing that we asked was what it means to be a woman and how do you get a strength. And I think it was kind of a unanimous response where they said strength is not inherent to women. So their idea of themselves is that they are weak and they need a certain kind of support. And what happens when that support is taken away? This came through a lot more categorically in the with the few women who were widows in that group, and the way they kind of negotiated with that status of widowhood within the Indian cultural context. That connected to the stigma of being strong and independent, because once you've lost your partner, you have to take care of your life, you have to take care of your children, and that becomes the major focus of your future aspirations. So education for children and having the best possible future in mind for them was the most important thing, and hence the stigma of being strong and independent around was that they're going out to work and they're going out at odd hours and things like that. So they had to be strong, but they had to be independent, but that was by chance. Their circumstances were so. So that's why the connection between the first and the third point. These are the components of the workshops that we had. As I said, our template was very flexible. So it was not to just go in and start with the stories and experiences or narration of that. And I remember the first time, our first workshop was with the Hijra community, and there was, the space was laid out in a way where the chairs were kept on the corners of the entire room, and there was a carpet in the middle, and everybody was sitting on the chairs. And this was a community this was the group of participants who very few had known each other. So this was a very diverse group of participants that had come in to participate in our workshop, and they did not know each other. So we came up with the idea that we need to have an introduction, which is not about your name or anything. It's just about one thing that you like. And we passed on passed a ball, but didn't pass it like linear fashionly. Like you throw it to anybody you want to. So that ice-breaking session turned into the second ice-breaking session of what you like, dislike, neutral. So a number of stories do you like rain? Then something followed up, rain is good because I like to have tea, I like to have pakoras, I like to think about intimacy, romance, and so on and so forth. So a number of their ideas came up in the game and play session. We wanted to have a tea break, but actually the tea break turned into dance and song. So I had we were working together as a team, and Ngozi was asked to start performing on a song which is from her own cultural context. And they looked it up on YouTube and they kind of made everybody dance and so on. Then the rapid fire, where we had some more stories, which was say a word and kind of whatever response you get. Interestingly, with the Hijra community, we kind of mimicked this template with the women as well, and it sort of unfolded in a similar manner. The story writing and painting was much more easier with the women because they were not too vocal as the Hijra community. But with the Hijra community, we found from the 18 participants on the first day, only 5 came up on the second day to kind of write and paint. With women, it was everybody was either painting or writing. So we have, sort of a very different way of engaging with these workshops that participants were in. And in the last one, we were just kind of looking at the responses and whatever was how exactly do they feel about the whole thing. This is some of the photographs from the Hijra workshops at the Hijra community. You have somebody writing, somebody painted this and kind of gave a poetry, and the Rangoli artist shared these pictures saying that I would like to showcase what I do. So that's this is the workshops with the women. As you can see on the right, you will find that there are 2 very significant ones. The first one, and we'll see it in the digital story as well, that there is a focus on marriage and education and how marriage should not come before you are educated and economically independent. The second picture on your right would be about what happens and what kind of family support that you get. once you lose your partner, and how technology is really helpful, because you can't see it in this picture, but it's all about, I have a phone and she has a phone. So I talk to my mother through phone, and that's my connection with my family. The one picture on the extreme left bottom is the one which is basically about the cultural art that they make during certain festivals outside the doorsteps of their houses. So it's something which is very recurring for them. So there is not much explanation on this, because this is what we do. We have always done this. But the idea is that they take care of this, and this was done by 2-3 women together on one chart paper. So they kind of come together and made this. Okay. Yeah. This was the showcase event. We kind of went again with the gameplay and screening of digital stories, feedback for the digital stories. The feedback for our approach was also very important for this. We found few ideas that were shared with us, and some of these responses felt like a picnic. I remember one of the members, the participants from the Hijra community, while we were leaving, said this was not boring at all. I was very apprehensive, and I was invited to participate in this. And I thought it's going to be all about questions and answers and everything. But none of that was there. You just made it as if we owned the space. We just did what we wanted to do. It was very organic for them. So that, I think, kind of captures what exactly we wanted to do. The interaction between the two groups, not like, we don't have a lot of footage for that, but the best memory of the entire showcase event is when one person from the Hijra community started to sing, and everybody joined in. And this kind of, tells you how Bollywood or Indian popular culture brings people together, where there was like absolute, breakdown of any kind of, wall that they might have built for themselves. And one joined from one side, everybody started singing, everybody clapped, the people were dancing, and, it kind of became almost like a very, very fun, merry event. And they sort of loved it. And then we went back for the next session. In terms of how exactly do we want to take this forward, and everybody that we had at the showcase event said that we want to continue with this, that this is a long-term partnership. So we have got invitations to come to their places. We have been told, whenever you are in Pune, call us again. And that this should not end here, that this is something where they want to make a change. This is some of the photographs and some of the moments from that showcase event. We also had a feedback wall, and they kind of, put their pictures and put their hand. So that. Okay. So the first one was with the women. The second one is with the participants from the Hijra community. These are some of the key learnings that we have for GBV. Of course, this is not, this doesn't take care of everything, but it is something that came about as the most significant. We know that there was a lack of opportunity and stigma. So sociocultural premises for economic and political opportunities was very, very clear in all the interactions we had. The ones in the gray are the ones that you will find as common between the two communities. The ones in the blue are specifically for the Hijra community. And the ones in reddish, maroonish is basically specifically for the women. So the 3 family support matters, and that you have identities and complexities and layers to your identities, that came forward very clearly in all our interactions. They kind of said this, that it's very different if you are a person who has lost a partner, or it's very different if you are a hijra who dresses up like a man, or who dresses up like a woman, and so the nuances came out in the way they shared their stories. Economic independence for women was definitely, as I said, a stigma. Children as their world is what became like the anchoring point of every conversation we had. And this was not just about children as their world, it was also about the fact that they wanted their girl child to be economically independent, so that she doesn't have to face the same problems as they are facing. So their narrative of being a woman needed to change. They wanted to take part in that narrative. Acceptance, health, and employment as aspirations for the Hijra community was very clear. But the thing that we found most interesting about the two communities is that with the Hijra community, there was a very strong sense of who they are, The identity was very clearly played out and was there in the workshop. And there was a desire to amplify everything that is being discussed to a space where it can be acted upon. So there were discussions on what could be done and how it could be done. Unlike when we were talking to women, it was mostly talking about this is how we feel, this is how we negotiated. But in terms of what exactly do we want for future, it was more to do with their personal ideas and their families and their children. This kind of has a lot of stuff in it, but to quickly kind of bring together, we started with the idea of a very flexible template of, how the workshops could be conducted. And one of the things that we found, the first thing that we found is that we cannot work with 3-week kind of workshop template. The time factor was very, very different when it comes to the communities that we engaged with. So for the community, the Hijra community, we had 1.5 day, and we met them for 1 full day because they said we have come here. We don't want 2-3 different days or anything, no different weeks. We want it together in 1 day, and we divided it before lunch, after lunch kind of sessions. And the next day would be like, when they would come in and talk about all the experiences that they have, and the recording in of the digital stories kind of took place. With the women, it was 2 different days, half day on 1 day, half day on the other. Again, because they had to go back and take care of the family, they had jobs, they had to, majorly because they were the caregivers in their families. So they had to take care of that specific time from morning or in the afternoon, either or. It can't be like a whole day or different days. We did find a few nominated leaders. By that, what I mean is that even though we kind of talked about creating a space where everybody can share their experiences, but some people said that, you should talk about it, you should say this, better. So that sort of thing also kind of came about, but eventually kind of was mitigated, because as and when they became comfortable, things changed. Stories and non-story spaces, I think this is something that we were not expecting, but 2 or 3 of our stories came in our game and play sessions, where people started to share about their lives, and they started to talk about, this is the experience that I had, and they kind of 10-15 minutes they did talk about it. So those spaces also needs to be seen as not just as warm-up spaces, but also spaces where we might be able to find some kind of reflections of their lives and their experiences. The space, physicality, and embodiment, I kind of talked about this, saying that, how they did not become very comfortable, but later on they kind of owned the space. So they told us what we can do. The dance and the songs and all of that was their idea. So the exercises kept on getting improvised according to how they were feeling. So we don't want to drink tea only, we want to dance as well. We want to sing as well. So those kind of things. And so much so that there was also sort of a demand from them for us to share our stories. So that's why I use the word dual role of facilitator and participant, because with the Hijra community, I very clearly remember the only way we could get them to have conversations and feel little comfortable is when all of us who were facilitating the workshop sat down on the carpet saying, I don't want to sit on the chair. And then we talked about the project, and then we started talking about our own lives. So I had to, kind of explain what it really means to be a woman in, a North Indian part of India, and to gain education elsewhere, and what kind of implications that might have. So my story was a jump start for the stories that kind of came from them. So we had to constantly participate as well. Human connections and showing and seeing vulnerabilities and marginalities is, again, took some time for us, but it became the most significant aspect of the workshops, where people were not, they were not constrained anymore. They were willing to talk about it. They were willing to listen to the others. And most significantly, when we engaged with the Hijra community, there were sharing of stories that led to the other people think that, okay, transgender identity means so much more than what I am. So there was a collective resonation of what exactly it means to be a transgender in India, and that there is a plurality of voices in there that we might not be able to capture if we're just talking about ourselves. So it created that space of community. That's why I said community building and community continuance for women, because before they came for the workshop, they already knew each other. They were from the same area, same region. So they kind of continued their bonds within that space, and that made them much more comfortable, much more quickly. And flexibility, improvisation, and taking a step back for us was, I think, the thing that we had to do. We constantly gave them ideas, but we also took a step back and said, what do you want to do? How would you want to take it forward? Anything that you would like to bring in. And that sort of allowed the space to be the way we wanted it to be, which is co-creative, co-participatory, and more cathartic for them as well at certain times, because they could share things that they might not have thought about earlier. So that's from my side. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rashi.
So
sorry. That's okay. It's a lot of learnings from that part, and I think it's quite rich. Even those numbers of engagement that we've had, I think we're quite rich in terms of what we've learned and how that methodology that we kind of thought about going into this project, and then actually how does that look in real life, and how does it look with different groups of participants and in different spaces. It just changes. So I'll do now is give you some examples of the digital stories that we have produced so far. And you'll be able to see some of the stories that were collected. So just give me a second. So I'll start with the Hijra stories. As Rashi mentioned, they were the first workshops that were done, and then influenced some of the work with the women as well. So hopefully you should be able to see that. Could you hear it? Does it sound okay? Great.
विषय था कि मेरे जीवन में बदलाव का पल। मेरा नाम सागर है। मैं एक समलैंगिक हूँ। मैं उम्र के 21 साल तक अपनी लैंगिकता के लेकर एक घुटन महसूस करता था। इस कारण मैं पढ़ाई, नौकरी या फिर परिवार में खुलेपन से जीने के लिए अपने आप को बंधन महसूस करता था। जब मैं पुणे स्टेशन के और भी समलैंगिक मित्रों से मिला, तब मेरे जीवन के घुटन दूर हो गई और मेरा जीवन आनंद से जीने में आसानी हो गई। समलैंगिक मित्रों ने मुझे इस लैंगिकता के विषय में जानकारी और सुरक्षित लैंगिक आरोग्य की जानकारी दी। इस कारण मेरा जीवन बदल गया और मैंने जब सही समय आया तब मैंने मेरे परिवार वालों को भी मेरे लैंगिकता के विषय में बताया। इस कारण मुझे अपने हिसाब से ज़िंदगी जीने के लिए रास्ता मिल गया। अभी मैं बहुत आनंद के साथ अपनी जीवन जी रहा हूँ।
One of the shorter stories, and then oh, sorry.
मैं ज़िंदगी में मैं अपना क्लियर करना चाहती थी, लेकिन मेरे सुख बहुत, अभी मेरा 62 उम्र है क्या, तो मेरे जीवन में मैंने पहला छोटी थी तो मैंने टिकली, कान के आयरिंगा, बिंदिया, ऐसा पाउडर के मेकअप के डब्बे बेचने की, मैं फूल का धंधा करने की। तो वो टाइम हमारा पुराने ज़माने 1969 या 80-90 का था। तो वो टाइम पे ज़रा पैसा नहीं था, तो उस टाइम मैंने खुद का बिजनेस चालू करी। 10 पैसे 15 पैसे ऐसा मैं टिकली, बिंदी ऐसा बेचने की वो ज़माने में। तो वैसा करके मैं बाद में मैं हिजरों में आ गई, ऐसा बेचते बेचते आ गई। तो फिर उस टाइम मेरे को अच्छा लगा नहीं कि कलाकारी सीखने को मिली, नाच गाना क्या होता है, हमारे जरीना गुरु मिले, हाँ, उन्होंने हमको सिखाया। फिर मेरा सरपराज गुरु के नाम पे हमारी रीत पड़ गई, चेला बन गई पूना में। फिर उसके बाद हमको कलाकारी क्या है उसमें से 2 पैसे मिल रहे। फिर ऐसा करते करते मैंने अच्छा जीवन बिताए। पे आज भी क्या मेरे तब क्या 1 रुपये 2 रुपये 5 रुपये सब हमको नाचने गाने में छोड़ते थे लोग। तो आज मैं मेरे मेहनत के ऊपर आज भी खड़ी हूँ। धन्यवाद। आने वाले आगे के लोगों को इतना ही कहना है कि अभी देखो, हमारे ज़माने में तो पैसा भी नहीं था, मेहनत बहुत करते थे। आज भी मेहनत उतनी चाहिए, लेकिन आज का 21वां शतक ऐसा कि ये तुम्हारे ज़माने में पैसा बहुत है, खाली कि 2 पैसे अपना जमा करो, अपने माँ बाप को संभालो, अच्छा रहो और अपना खुद का क्लियर रखो और अपना आरोग्य अच्छा रखो। सबसे पहला अपना आरोग्य अच्छा रखेंगे तो तुम 10 काम ज़्यादा करेंगे, और आप अगर अपना आरोग्य अच्छा नहीं रखेंगे तो बीमारी रहने दो, कुछ भी बीमारी आने दो, उसको संघर्ष करके टक्कर देके दवा खाओ, गोली खाओ, पर उसको आगे मत बढ़ने दो। और अपना हेल्थ पहला अच्छा रखो। तुम हेल्थ अच्छा रखेंगे तो दुनिया के काम अच्छा करेंगे। और आगे की पीढ़ी को लिए मैं इतना ही संदेश देना चाहती हूँ कि अपने माँ बाप को संभालो। अगर कोई हिजड़ा रहेगा तो पुराने हिजड़े लोग बोलते थे, देख बेटा अपने माँ बाप को नहीं छोड़ना, फिर बाद में गुरु रहता है। वैसा ही मेरा कहना है कि आप अपने माँ बाप को पहला ध्यान दो, फिर अपना 2 पैसे जमा करो अपने दुख सुख के लिए। मेहनत कितना भी करो, चिकाटी से मेहनत करो, बारिश आने दो, कुछ भी आने दो, पर पहले अपनी तबीयत अच्छा रखो। तबीयत अच्छा रखेंगे तो 10 काम तुम ज़्यादा अच्छा करेंगे। यही मेरा अगले समाज को या हमारे लोगों को इतना कहना है कि आप ऐसा रहो, खाली बुरा काम मत करो, 2 नंबर का काम मत करो जिससे कारण तुमको धोखा हो सकता है। कोई अगर चोरी कर रहा है, कोई अगर किसी को लूट रहा है, तो ये 2 दिन का 4 दिन की चांदनी रात है, फिर अंधेरी रात है। इसीलिए बुरे काम में दखल अंदाज़ा मत करो कि मैं झट से 2 मिनट में पैसे वाला बनूंगा, झट से ये करेंगा, लेकिन बुरे का अंत बुरा है। इसीलिए मेहनत से जो भी कमाएंगा वो आपको सफलता देगा। यही मेरा आपको संदेश है। नमस्ते।
Right. So this is the two stories that were shared so far that we've created from the Hijra community, and I'll do 2 as well from the women survivors as well. So again, there's a shorter and a longer one. One second.
ऐसे मुझे बेटी हो जाती है ना स्कूल में, वो आती है, अच्छा लगता है, और पढ़ाई करेंगे अच्छा होगा।
ही मुलगी आहे आणि म्हणजे माझं असं मत आहे की माझं जे झालं ते मी सांगते। माझं लग्न व्हायच्या अगोदर मी स्वतःच्या पायावर उभे नव्हते आणि आता पण सध्या नाही आहे, म्हणजे एवढे कम्फर्टेबल नाही आहे। तर माझं असं मत आहे की मी माझ्या मुलीचं लग्न ती जेव्हा तिच्या स्वतःच्या पायावरती उभे राहील किंवा म्हणजे काही म्हणजे, पण मला म्हणजे ते चित्र मी काढलं आहे, म्हणजे डॉक्टर म्हणजे ते आलंच ना, म्हणजे स्वतःच्या पायावरती उभं राहणं, मला चित्र नाही काढता आलं एवढं व्यवस्थित। पण माझ्या मुलीचं ज्यावेळेस लग्न होईल त्यावेळेस मी तिला तिच्या अगोदर स्वतःच्या पायावरती उभं करणार, स्ट्रॉंग बनवणार, लड़के को मेरे, और फिर शादी करणार।
ये लिखा है कि मेरा मतलब नहीं क्या जीवन का जो मराठी में बात करूँ चल जाएगा। मी याच्यामध्ये हे लिहिलं की माझ्या आयुष्यातला सगळ्यात सुंदर क्षण आहे तो म्हणजे जेव्हा मी प्रेग्नेंट होते तो, तेव्हा माझ्या मिस्टरांची एक अपेक्षा होती की मला एक मुलगी व्हावी, आणि माझी पण अपेक्षा तीच होती, मला मुलगा नको होता, मला मुलगी हवी होती। मला मुलगी झाली, मला खूप आनंद झाला, खूप म्हणजे खूप, आणि त्या मुलीसाठी आम्ही दोघं पण खूप खुश होतो, म्हणजे माझे मिस्टर पण मी पण, आम्ही दोघं पण खूप खुश होतो। याच्यामध्ये म्हणजे आम्ही म्हणजे नाही का पुढचं प्लॅनिंग केलं होतं पूर्णपणे, की आता या मुलीसाठी आम्ही काय काय करणार किंवा काय काय करायचं किंवा काय त्याच्यासाठी आपण म्हणजे त्याचं आयुष्य पुढं कसं छान होईल याच्यासाठी आम्ही एक प्लॅनिंग केलं होतं. पण अचानकमध्ये एक अपघात घडला, त्याच्यामध्ये माझे मिस्टर गेले. त्यावेळेस मी खूप तुटले, म्हणजे पूर्णपणे तुटून गेले. मला काही समजत नव्हतं, मला काही कळत नव्हतं की नेमकं करायचं काय. त्यावेळी माझ्या आईने मला साथ दिली, माझ्या आईने आणि भावाने म्हणजे मला समजून सांगितलं असं नसतं, एक माणूस गेला म्हणून त्याच्या मागे आपलं आयुष्य संपत नाही, आपण पुढे जगायचं असतं. मग मी प्रयत्न केला पुढे जाण्याचा. खूप अडचणी आल्या, खूप म्हणजे खूप. कोणी काही बोललं सहन करावं लागलं. 10 रुपये नसायचे मुलीसाठी, माझ्याकडे पैसे नसायचे. मी तुटून गेले होते पूर्णपणे. मी स्वतःला सांगितलं, स्वतःच्या मनाची तयारी केली आणि मी त्या एक छोट्याच्या मुलीला 6 महिन्याच्या मुलीला घेऊन मी सासूच्या घराबाहेर पडलो. म्हटलं नाही, आपलं आयुष्य इथं थांबवायचं नाही, आपल्याला पुढं जायचं. त्याच्यानंतरून ज्यावेळी मिस्टर वारले, त्यांचा ॲक्सिडेंट झाला होता, त्यावेळी पण मला खूप प्रॉब्लेम आले. मी कधी दवाखाना, पोलीस चौकी, कोर्ट कचेरी असलं काही बघितलं नव्हतं. पण त्यावेळी मला जेव्हा तिथं थांबायला लागलं त्यावेळी मी घाबरले, मला समजलं नाही काय करायचं. पण त्यातून पण मला खूप जणांनी साथ दिली, समजून सांगितलं काय करायचं, पुढं कसं करायचं. मी ते करत गेले. त्याच्याने मी धाडसी झाले, माझ्या मनातली भीती गेली. मी कष्ट केलं, मी कामाला गेले, 2 पैसे मिळाले, त्यातून 2 रुपये मी मागं टाकले माझ्या मुलीसाठी. 2 रुपये मी स्वतःच्या मनाने, स्वतःच्या इच्छेने तिच्यासाठी खर्च केला. किंवा मी एखादी गोष्ट तिच्यासाठी घेते किंवा त्या मुलांनी मला प्रेमाने मागितलं आणि मी दिलं ना, मला खूप आनंद होतो की माझी मुलं खूप खुश आहे आणि ह्याच्यातच मी पण खुश आहे.
माझा अनुभव, मला आलेला अनुभव, माझा नवरा ज्यावेळेस आजारी होता, मी कधी घरातून बाहेर पडले नव्हते, पण मला इतकं त्या दवाखान्याने माझा जीव वैतागून गेला होता. पण तरी पण मी हार मानली नाही. मी खूप दवाखान्याचं पण केलं, माझ्या मुलांसाठी मी लढले. पण मला असं वाटायचं कधीतरी की माझ्या मुलांसाठी ते पाहिजे होते, पण नाही, ते माझ्या नशिबात नव्हतं. पण मला आता माझ्या मुलांना शिकवायचे, घडवायचे, घडायचे. It was quite a nice compilation of different women's stories in the last one. But a lot, as you can see, are converging around topics around children and the future for their children. So to wrap up, and we'll have a bit of time for discussion, I'll hand over to Anoop just to leave us with a few final thoughts around the learnings from all of this process, as you can see, in quite rich community voices that we have collected. So give me a second.
Oh, thank you, Nadia. So yeah, I don't want to be cautious of time, but also not to repeat everything that's already been said. In terms of looking forward, and we're thinking more about kind of the more sort of broader issues around conducting research within these spaces, and the sort of conversations that we've been having around the workshops, but also away from that, aside from that, within team meetings, for example. So just trying to consolidate some key themes that have emerged from those conversations. One of these, and it's a very significant one, are the kind of structural barriers that we might face in actually conducting this kind of research. We've realized the fact that, you know, very, very clearly, that we cannot overlook the practicalities of engaging in this kind of work, those structural barriers. So thinking through ethics, standardized approaches to ethics approvals, the kind of this method does not neatly fit into this box approach. It can stifle the kind of creativity that we try to embed within creative methods, within research work that is attempting to engage with communities with collaborative means. So what are the structures that can become a hindrance, really, rather than a facilitator for us to actually engage in these spaces? And those are much broader conversations that need to be opened up to institutional processes, but also funders and funding bodies more broadly. The idea about this notion of messy ethics, I've mentioned this before back in March to our colleagues in India as well, about thinking about ethical approvals and ethical processes being much more fluid and in situ. So allowing that fluidity to engage with the space much better and in a much more relevant fashion. And this goes back to more of those structural issues of having, let's say, for example, participant consent forms, for example. These don't always work within certain communities. The notion of signing something off has a variety of connotations attached to it when you're working with certain communities. So broader conversations around institutions and funding bodies around processes and practicalities of engaging in this research. Another one of the key kind of big takeaways is the key sensitivities we have. So thinking about culturally appropriate methods of engagement and understanding cultural nuances, allowing for a better articulation around what Rashi mentioned around non-extractive methodological approaches. What it means to collaborate is not a universal idea. Collaboration comes in a number of different forms. What does it mean to come together to do something? And sometimes it doesn't always mean, sort of verbalizing ideas, physical presence, body language, the way we move, the way we articulate and understand the world, and also perform in those spaces is all part and parcel of that. We're very aware that there are inherent power structures at play within the kind of approaches that we use. And there's always going to be bigger conversations that need to take place around how do we practically and pragmatically kind of dissolve some of those power dynamics within these spaces. How do we collaborate truly and honestly with people by trying to kind of alleviate some of those issues. Thinking around applicability, again, around the model that was created, about the workshop model that was created by, sort of Andy, Selena and Antonio, which was great. And this idea of it being non-prescriptive, it's a model of engagement that allows for diversity across other LMIC contexts. So it creates a sense of contextually informed approaches through collaborative means. So allowing context not process necessarily to be the driver, what works within those spaces. And as Rashi and also Ngozi as well, who unfortunately is not here today, as they've noted, that there was certain level of flexibility that was required within those spaces, the notion of time, the notion of attendance, what works best for individuals and letting that drive that space. Another thing also, thinking around language use and terminologies. Again, it's small oversights, but we tend to use languages in very specific ways. So the notion of the understanding of the Hijra community is not, strictly speaking, transgender. So within context, we have to understand that Hijra does not directly mean the transgender community within context. As you can see, there are a number of sub-community groups that kind of come under that umbrella categorization of what it means to be Hijra. So not, again, trying to battle the Eurocentricity maybe of terminologies as well and trying to understand them within context. We have subsequently applied for another much larger grant to the AHRC on creative approaches to mitigate GBV in the Global South context, working with new partners in Bangladesh, the We Can Foundation. So looking at network expansion on that. We are yet to hear back from that, but the intention is that this network project is just the start of a series of kind of projects and work that we will endeavour to continue going forward, hopefully. And yeah, hopefully we are able to garner more interest from other stakeholder groups as well as part of this. So yeah, thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you. And I'll leave this as well as the final slide. So in terms of the project website, contact details for myself, if there's any questions, and also our Twitter/X presence as well. So we will continue to develop our project presence online, and additional materials that will be developed following the data that we have gathered, and the stories and any other developments of the network will be publicized on there.